Welcome to the reading of the Sabbath School lesson for the second quarter of 2022. Welcome to Lesson 7 in the series on Genesis, titled The Covenant with Abraham, ready for teaching on May 14, and I'm Percy Harrold. Monday, May 9, Abraham's Doubts. Read Genesis chapter 19, verses 1 to 19. What is the significance of Abram's decision to go with Hagar, even despite God's promise to him? How do the two women represent two attitudes of faith? And we'll also compare that with Galatians 4:21 to 31. So first of all, Genesis chapter 16 and verse 1. Now Sarai, Abram's wife, had borne him no children, and she had an Egyptian maidservant whose name was Hagar. So Sarai said to Abram, "See now, the Lord has restrained me from bearing children. Please go into my maid. Perhaps I shall obtain children by her." And Abram heeded the voice of Sarai. Then Sarai, Abram's wife, took Hagar her maid, the Egyptian, and gave her to her husband Abram to be his wife, after Abram had dwelt 10 years in the land of Canaan. So he went in to Hagar, and she conceived. And when she saw that she had conceived, her mistress became despised in her eyes. Then Sarai said to Abram, "My wrong be upon you. I gave my maid into your embrace, and when she saw that she had conceived, I became despised in her eyes. The Lord judge between you and me." So Abram said to Sarai, "Indeed, your maid is in your hand. Do to her as you please." And when Sarai dealt harshly with her, she fled from her presence. Now the angel of the Lord found her by a spring of water in the wilderness, by the spring on the way to Shur. And he said, "Hagar, Sarai's maid, where have you come from, and where are you going?" She said, "I am fleeing from the presence of my mistress Sarai." The angel of the Lord said to her, "Return to your mistress, and submit yourself under her hand." Then the angel of the Lord said to her, "I will multiply your descendants exceedingly, so that they shall not be counted for multitude." And the angel of the Lord said to her, "Behold, you are with child, and you shall bear a son. You shall call his name Ishmael, because the Lord has heard your affliction. He shall be a wild man, his hand shall be against every man, and every man's hand against him. And he shall dwell in the presence of all his brethren." Then she called the name of the Lord who spoke to her, "You are the God who sees." For she said, "Have I also here seen him who sees me?" Therefore the well was called Beer Lahai Roi. Observe it. It is between Kadesh and Bered. So Hagar bore Abram a son, and Abram named his son, whom Hagar bore, Ishmael. Abram was 86 years old when Hagar bore Ishmael to Abram. And then Galatians chapter 4, verses 21 to 31. "Tell me, you who desire to be under the law, do you not hear the law? For it is written that Abraham had 2 sons, the one by a bondwoman, the other by a free woman. But he who was of the bondwoman was born according to the flesh, and he of the free woman through promise, which things are symbolic. For these are the 2 covenants, the one from Mount Sinai, which give birth to bondage, which is Hagar. For this Hagar is Mount Sinai in Arabia, and corresponds to Jerusalem, which now is, and is in bondage with her children. But the Jerusalem above is free, which is the mother of us all. For it is written, 'Rejoice, O barren, you who do not bear, break forth and shout, you who are not in labour, for the desolate has many more children than she who has a husband.' Now we brethren, as Isaac was, are children of promise. But as he who was born according to the flesh then persecuted him who was born according to the Spirit, even so it is now. Nevertheless, what does the Scripture say? 'Cast out the bondwoman and her son, for the son of the bondwoman shall not be heir with the son of the free woman.' So then, brethren, we are not children of the bondwoman, but of the free." When Abraham doubted in Genesis 15:2, God unambiguously reassured him that he would have a son. Years later, Abram is still without a son. Even after God's last powerful prophecy, Abram seems to have lost his faith. He does not believe anymore that it will be possible for him to have a son with Sarai. Sarai, feeling hopeless, takes the initiative and urges him to resort to a common practice of that time in the ancient Near East: take a surrogate. Hagar, Sarai's servant, is appointed for this service. The system worked. Ironically, this human strategy seemed more efficient than did faith in God's promises. The passage describing Sarai's relation to Abraham echoes the story of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. The two texts share a number of common motives. Sarai, like Eve, is active. Abram, like Adam, is passive, and share common verbs and phrases: heed the voice, take, and give. This parallel between the two stories implies God's disapproval of this course of action. The Apostle Paul refers to this story to make his point about works versus grace in Galatians 4:23-26, which we've just read. In both accounts, the result is the same. The immediate reward of human work outside the will of God leads to future troubles. Note that God is absent during the whole course of action. Sarai speaks about God, but never speaks to him, nor does God speak to either of them. This absence of God is striking, especially after the intense presence of God in the previous chapter. God then appears to Hagar, but only after she has left the house of Abram. This unexpected appearance discloses God's presence in spite of human attempts to work without him. The reference to the angel of the Lord in Genesis 16:7 is a title that is often identified with the Lord, Yahweh. See Genesis 18:1. Then the Lord appeared to him by the terebinth trees of Mamre as he was sitting in the tent door in the heat of the day. And verse 13, and the Lord said to Abraham, why did Sarah laugh, saying, shall I surely bear a child, since I am old? And verse 22, then the men turned away from there and went toward Sodom. But Abraham still stood before the Lord. This time it is God who takes the initiative and announces to Hagar that she will give birth to a son, Ishmael, whose name means God hears, as we read in Genesis 16 verse 11. Ironically, the story, which ends with the idea of hearing, Shama, echoes the hearing at the beginning of the story, when Abram heeded Shama, the voice of Sarai, in Genesis 16 and verse 2. Let's read those two texts. Genesis 16 verse 11, and the angel of the Lord said to her, behold, you are with child, and you shall bear a son. You shall call his name Ishmael, because the Lord has heard your affliction. And the same chapter, Genesis 16 verse 2. So Sarai said to Abram, see now, the Lord has restrained me from bearing children. Please go into my maid. Perhaps I shall obtain children by her. And Abram heeded the voice of Sarai. And so to finish today, why is it so easy for us to have the same lack of faith that Abram had here? This lesson was read by Dr. Percy Harrold for Christian Services for the Blind. Sponsored by the Sabbath School Department and distributed through Hope Channel Australia, this podcast is also redistributed by Hope Channel Germany, Christian Record Services for the Blind, and It Is Written. It is also available on SoundCloud and through multiple podcast distributors, including Apple iTunes. Remember, God is always faithful.